So 2 decades later, what's changed? It's now widely recognized that just 20% of health outcomes are tied to medical care, whereas up to 70% are tied to healthy behaviors and what's called the social determinants of health. Basically, everything that happens to us for that vast majority of time when we're not in the doctor's office or the hospital. Healthcare executives now routinely remind us that our zip code matters more than our genetic code. And one healthcare publication even recently had the audacity to describe the social determinants of health as the feel-good buzzword of the year.
Adidas teamed up with an organization called Parley for the oceans. Parley goes out and collects plastic waste from the ocean. Adidas uses the plastic waste to make shoes. Shoes made with plastic from the ocean, good for the environment and good for business. Because if you know that rapidly growing consumer segment known as hipsters, and I know you know hipsters, then you know that a hipster, faced with the choice between a no-name shoe and an Adidas made with plastic from the ocean, will pick the Adidas every day of the week and twice on Sunday, and then walk around like it's no big deal, but look for every opportunity to talk about them.
One day, the banana is perfect, bright yellow, firm, flavorful. But even within that same day, brown spots appear on your perfectly ripe banana. Its flesh turns mushy, and it's destined for the compost or, at best, banana bread. But scientists are developing a way to extend the life of ripe bananas. It's a spray-on coating made from chitosan, a substance found in crab and shrimp shells. The new gel can be sprayed on bananas to slow the ripening process by up to 12 days. Like other fruits, bananas remain alive after being picked, and it actually continues to respire. This means that they take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. The more the banana breathes, the faster it ripens and then rots. Bananas ripen more quickly than most fruit because they don't naturally slow the respiration after being picked. In fact, it speeds up, causing bananas to become mushy. Chitosan not only kills the bacteria on banana's skin that then leads to rot, it also significantly slows down the respiration in the first place. So bananas won't drive you bananas. So, in a very important tense, um, memory is the cognitive function that stores knowledge that we've acquired through learning and perception. But also, memory is important because memory frees our behavior from being controlled by the present stimulus environment. If you didn't have memory, all you'd be able to do was react to whatever is currently in the environment now, whatever it is that you're experiencing. But memory allows us to respond to past events as well as events in the current stimulus environment. And memory also gives us the means to reflect on our experiences so that we plan for future encounters.
My hero is Marie Curie. She was a Polish physicist and chemist working in France, and she conducted pioneering research on radioactivity. She was also the first woman who won a Nobel Prize. Marie Curie is my hero because she showed a lot of determination in following her career path and her passions. She also showed a lot of patience in working for years to receive results from her experiments. Marie Curie, she designed and built the first mobile X-ray machines. She worked on the front lines of the First World War, along with her daughter, saving soldiers.
For 4 centuries, the Viking declined. The people of the Shetland Islands off the north coast of Scotland continued to sell their goods through the North European Hanseatic League. The Hansa's merchants bought shiploads of salted fish, and in return, the islanders got cash, grain, cloth, and other goods. This lasted until the Act of Union between Scotland and England in 1707. This act prohibited the Hansa merchants from trading with Scotland. Consequently, Shetland went into an economic depression. The independent farmers of Shetland had to sell their land and were then obligated to pay rent, eventually becoming serfs. Perhaps you remember the dire predictions from the analysts. The fall off in housing threatened to drag down the entire economy. High energy prices put the kibosh on consumer spending. Runaway inflation was poised to take off. David Wiss is an economist at Standard & Poor's. He says in the end, none of those things happened in the final 3 months of last year.
One of the things that people have said about agriculture is that, on the whole, it's more labor intensive than hunting and gathering. And that's one of the reasons why people have looked to explanations which you might say are kind of coercive factors, that people have been forced into agriculture because they had no alternative. That is ultimately what may happen. But at the very beginning, it could be that agriculture was developed because people want special status foods for feasting, that it was actually a social need. I mean, how much of what we do in our lives is generated by competition with others? And a lot of that is powered by desire for new things, new statuses, new whatever it might be. Respect and recognition also are important. And in small-scale societies, a lot of those sorts of factors are generated by the ability to, for instance, throw feasts. One possibility is that some of these foods that were being grown were actually intended especially as feasting foods. One of the things that people have said about agriculture is that, on the whole, it's more labor intensive than hunting and gathering.
Well, the banana is the first cultivated fruit. It's one of the food items that literally brought people out of the jungle, out of their hunter gatherer lifestyles, and was there at the dawn of agriculture, which is what helped force human beings into communities. It's really one of the things that helped invent human culture. It's about 7,000 years of history. And the banana, from its center of origin, which is believed to be Papua New Guinea, spread out with people who traveled in boats across the Pacific into the mainland of Asia and all the way south to Australia, across Indonesia and Micronesia, and eventually they moved as far as Africa and even possibly to Ecuador all in this time, and all on paddle boats and wind-driven boats.
I'm going to argue that the tremendous increases in productivity that we associate with the Industrial Revolution originate not so much from changes in science or technology or new inventions, where England was far from unique as from changes in attitudes towards morality, towards what constituted the good, attitudes towards property, which became in England individuals long before it did on the continent, attitudes toward the proper role of government. And together, these attitudes constitute much of what the Luddites were protesting against.
We are trying to understand the locomotion of one of our closest living relatives, which is the orangutan, and also the locomotion of all of the apes and the common ancestor of humans and the other apes. And in that area, we have had a big problem traditionally, and that we know a lot about how they move around the forest. I've been out to the forest and spent a year recording the different types of locomotion they use, but we have no idea about the energetic cost of how they move around the forest and the solutions that they find to problems of moving around the canopy. And what we're doing here is using the parkour athletes as an analogy for a large-bodied ape moving around a complex environment and getting them to move around in the course that we've made that they've never seen before. And we're going to record their energetic expenditure while they're doing it.
For a long time now, it's been a widely accepted and rarely questioned belief that a strong corporate culture goes hand in hand with success. However, a recent study has cast some doubt on this principle. After all, the authors of the report argue for culture. A company's buildup may be strong, but wrong. There is little point in every employee marching to the same tune if they are all marching in the wrong direction. Also, malaria is something that is a very complex disease with this complex life cycle. That means that if you're going to eliminate it, you have to be able to target cute parasites in humans. You have to be able to target parasites in the mosquitoes, that mosquito population. And so that requires a lot of resources. It requires really good planning and a health system across all these different levels. And so I think the political capital that you need for that, the educational infrastructure you need for that, and the economic resources you need for that are quite a challenge.
Belief is the human capacity to imagine, to be creative, to hope and dream, to infuse the world with meanings, and to cast our aspirations far and wide. Limited neither by personal experience nor material reality, believing is a commitment, an investment, a devotion to possibilities. Beliefs permeate neurobiology, bodies and ecologies acting as dynamic agents in evolutionary processes. The human capacity for belief, the specifics of belief, and our diverse belief systems shape, structure, and alter our daily lives, our societies, and the world around us.
In this tutorial, we will show you how to find specific journal articles using the library catalogue. The university subscribes to over 18,000 journals across a variety of subjects, most of which are available electronically to find a specific journal article using a library catalogue. We need to search by the journal name as individual article titles are not listed in the catalogue.
For all his fame and celebration, William Shakespeare remains a mysterious figure with regards to personal history. There are just two primary sources for information on the bard: his works and various legal and church documents that have survived from Elizabethan times. Naturally, there are many gaps in this body of information, which tells us little about Shakespeare the man.
Now, that story's been scotched as only part of contingency planning, but it was a symptom of the dramatic turn of events in South Australia, and it flushed out other remarks from water academics and people like Tim Flannery, indicating that things were really much worse than had been foreshadowed, even earlier this year. So is Adelaide, let alone some whole regions of South Australia, in serious trouble? Considering that the vast amount of its drinking water comes from the beleaguered Murray, something many of us outside the state may not have quite realized. Is their predicament something we have to face up to as a nation?
In animals, a movement is coordinated by a cluster of neurons in the spinal cord called the Central Contract Pattern Generator, CPG. This produces signals that drive muscles to contract rhythmically in a way that produces running or walking, depending on the pattern of pulse. A simple signal from the brain instructs the CPG to switch between mode, such as going from a standstill to walking.
What's the most universal utterance in languages across the globe?
Huh?
Correct.
Huh?
That's right.
Huh?
Exactly. Because a new study finds that everybody around the world does indeed say, huh? The findings in the journal PLOS One. The researchers were exploring linguistic tools people use to assure fluid communication. In this case, they were looking for an interjection that signals that a listener missed something, and prompts the speaker to repeat or rephrase the original statement. In other words, something that works like the English word, huh? So they eavesdropped on nearly 200 conversations in 10 different tongues, from Italian to Icelandic, and they found that in language after language, a word that sounds a lot like, huh, gets the job done. For example, it's short and sweet, so it's likely to stop the speaker before the listener gets too lost, and it sounds like a question, so it warrants a response. The sound appears not to be innate. Babies don't use it before they say mama, but most 5-year-olds are masters of, no matter where they come from.
Computer status report.
After its ongoing Mars missions, NASA will concentrate less on the Red Planet and more on the solar system's other planets and moons, including our own. That's what NASA Administrator Mike Griffin told an audience of researchers last week at the 39th Lunar and Planetary Conference in Texas. The Mars Science Laboratory lands in 2010. Griffin said that NASA is now planning in earnest for an outer planet's flagship mission to Europa, Titan, or Ganymede. Europa and Ganymede are moons of Jupiter. Titan is a moon of Saturn. The reorientation of NASA's planetary exploration programs is in response to a recent National Research Council report card. The NRC gave NASA an A for its Mars work, but only a C for its overall research and analysis program, and a dismal D for outer planets efforts. Griffin also noted that NASA is now planning 7 different small and medium-class missions to the moon by 2014, and the Messenger spacecraft goes into orbit around Mercury in 2011.
Plants can't choose where their seeds end up. Some float on the wind, others on the water. Many seeds hitch a ride on or inside animals. And the farther a seed gets from its parent, and any predators or disease the parent might have, the better its chance of survival. Or so the theory goes. Researchers studied that phenomenon in the South American chili pepper Capsicum chacoense, which relies on birds like flycatchers to spread its seed. To get realistic samples, researchers plucked chili seeds from the droppings of captive flycatchers. Then they scattered them near and far from wild chili bushes in Bolivia. Contrary to the prevailing theory, distant seeds fared no better than seeds directly beneath chili plants. But it turns out the trip through the birds gave seeds a different competitive edge. The passage stripped them of predator-attracting chemicals and pathogenic fungi, which quadrupled the seed's survival rate compared to their undigested counterparts. The results appear in the journal Ecology Letters. So even though these chili seeds don't need to go the distance to survive, you might say that a seed in the bird is worth about 4 on the bush. Plants can't choose where their seeds end up. Some float on the wind, others on the water. Many seeds hitch a ride on or inside animals. And the farther a seed gets from its parent, and any predators or disease the parent might have, the better its chance of survival. Or so the theory goes. Researchers studied that phenomenon in the South American chili pepper Capsicum chacoense, which relies on birds like flycatchers to spread its seed. To get realistic samples, researchers plucked chili seeds from the droppings of captive flycatchers. Then they scattered them near and far from wild chili bushes in Bolivia. Contrary to the prevailing theory, distant seeds fared no better than seeds directly beneath chili plants. But it turns out the trip through the birds gave seeds a different competitive edge. The passage stripped them of predator-attracting chemicals and pathogenic fungi, which quadrupled the seed's survival rate compared to their undigested counterparts. The results appear in the journal Ecology Letters. So even though these chili seeds don't need to go the distance to survive, you might say that a seed in the bird is worth about 4 on the bush.
The early Earth's oceans were home to a lot of interesting chemistry. Now scientists have found that amino acids thought to be present way back when could have been cooked into other compounds vital for life, an idea you should take with a grain of salt. 4 billion years ago, the planet was probably covered by a salty ocean dotted with volcanic islands and short-lived continents. German researchers recently mimicked some of the chemistry taking place along the coasts of the volcanic islands. They created an approximation of primordial seawater. Then they evaporated it to simulate what went on at those volcanic coasts. They baked the residue, creating salt crusts. At those high temperatures, amino acids interacted with metal ions in the salt crusts and were converted into other important biological molecules such as pyrroles, which are part of the structures of chlorophyll in plants and hemoglobin in animals. The scientists presented their findings September 17th at the European Planetary Science Conference in Potsdam. Over hundreds of thousands of years, these novel compounds could have built up along the volcanic coasts, creating materials for the first living cells, which were really worth their salt.
Here's an impassioned plea for gun control. Of nail guns, that is, because accidents involving nail guns have gone through the renovated roof. In 2005, almost 15,000 people were treated in U.S. emergency rooms for nail gun injuries. That's twice the number in 2001 and 3 times the injuries back in 1991, according to data released in the April 13th issue of Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report put out by the CDC. The rising popularity of do-it-yourselfing seems to be behind the unfortunate trend. Most injuries are puncture wounds to the hands, followed by hits to the forearms, legs, and feet. 6% of the wounded wind up being hospitalized. Although better safety instruction would no doubt help, the report's authors suggest a systems approach to the problem. They'd like nail guns to be impossible to fire until the nose was depressed, which would presumably happen only when the gun was flush up against whatever needed nailing. By the way, 96% of the injured were males, which could mean that they're doing most of the work or that women read the instructions.
What had the legs of a gator and the jaws of a fish? Why, the earliest land animals. Because a new study shows that animals evolved weight-bearing limbs long before they had the chompers to really take advantage of a terrestrial diet. The research is in the journal Integrative and Comparative Biology. Scientists had suspected that the first four-legged creatures to haul their carcasses out of the ocean didn't belly up to the salad bar straight away, but they lacked definitive proof. Now, researchers have carefully examined the fossilized faces of 89 beasties that lived on land and sea, some 300 to 400 million years ago. They probed the jaws for a range of biomechanical features, such as how much force they could give to their bite. The result seems it took tens of millions of years after setting foot on land to come up with a mouth that could munch on the greenery. Why the lag? Could be the critters had to stop being such mouth breathers and shift from using gills to using lungs, which freed their jaws to develop in new ways, and which left no more excuses to not eat their veggies. Since the first human genome sequence was published, thousands of people have submitted their DNA for scientific analysis. They made these donations anonymously, or so they thought. Now, using publicly available information, researchers found they could figure out the identities of 50 individuals who had loaned their genes to science. The results, although not the names of the people, are in the journal Science. Biomedical research depends on human subjects, and issues of privacy have always been a concern. When scientists share genomic data, they first strip away identifying information, like the individual's name and date of birth. But is that really enough? Researchers looked at a specific set of markers in genomes whose sequences were in a public database, and they found that by matching up these markers with sequences that people had submitted to genealogy websites, they could identify some of the genome donors' relatives, and, with a bit more sleuthing, come up with their actual names. Of course, many people now post online accounts of what's on their minds, or even on their menus. But even those who are relatively relaxed about their privacy might think twice about their genomes going public.
Well, the 90s came around and finally it clicked that normal people could get online, which hadn't really clicked before. And the little trick that finally put it together was Tim Berners-Lee HTML. So thank you to the UK for providing the fellow who finally put the missing link in place. And then what happened in the 90s was this extraordinary outpouring of creativity and constructiveness from millions and millions of people. There were millions of people making web pages, creating content online, creating social experiments, creating lessons, all sorts of things. And the first decade of the web took place without much of a profit motive, without any particular charismatic figures driving it, without fear, without a desire for an afterlife or any other religious gambits, without advertising, without any of the traditional motivational schemes. It simply happened because people enjoyed it and it was a good idea.
Knowledge of the inheritance of characteristics has been implicitly used since prehistoric times for improving crop plants and animals through selective breeding. However, the modern science of genetics, which seeks to understand the mechanisms of inheritance, only began with the work of Gregor Mendel in the mid-19th century. Although he did not know the physical basis for the heredity, Mendel observed that inheritance is fundamentally a discrete process where specific traits are inherited in an independent manner. These basic units of inheritance are now called genes. Although genetics plays a large role in determining the appearance and behavior of organisms, it is the interactions of genetics with the environment an organism experiences that determines the ultimate outcome. For example, while genes play a role in determining a person's height, the nutrition and health that person experiences in childhood also have a large effect. Genetics, a discipline of biology, is the science of heredity and variation in living organisms.